Pakistan is often framed as the epicenter of terrorism in South Asia. It's accused of harboring militants, accused of training proxy fighters, accused of destabilizing its neighbors through deniable violence. This narrative has become so dominant that it feels almost timeless, but it isn't. Long before 9/11, long before the global war on terror, South Asia's first large-scale state-sponsored proxy war was not launched by Pakistan. It was launched against Pakistan. In 1971, when India trained, armed, paid, embedded, and operationally directed an insurgent force inside Pakistani territory, the Mukti Bani, using methods that today would be unambiguously described as proxy terrorism. And this isn't speculation. It's documented in contemporary journalism, academic research, military memoirs, and even admissions by Indian leaders themselves. To understand how this happened, we have to start with the conditions that made East Pakistan vulnerable, but not lose sight of how those conditions were later weaponized by a neighboring state. From its creation in 1947, Pakistan existed as two wings separated by more than 1,600 kilometers of Indian territory, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. The distance between the two was huge, and of course, India exploited it. But it's also important to acknowledge the facts. East Pakistanis had their grievances against the West. From representation to language to economic share, the tension was there. And of course, this led to political unrest, an unrest that led to calls for freedom. But then came March 1971. The Pakistan Army launched Operation Searchlight to restore law and order. And a lot has been written and documented on this, and maybe that's a topic for another day. But behind the scenes, India was doing far more than offering refuge. It was preparing for a proxy war. By early April 1971, resistance inside East Pakistan existed, but it was fragmented and disorganized. But India made a strategic decision. Rather than waiting for events to unfold, it would shape them. On April 12th, Colonel M.A.G. Usmani assumed command of armed resistance forces at Taliapra in Sylhet. 5 days later, on April 17th, he was formally named Commander-in-Chief of the Bangladesh Armed Forces, a move recorded in Banglapedia and widely acknowledged as the institutional birth of the Mukti Bani as a structured force. India's intelligence agency RAW became the backbone of this transformation. According to Abu Rashid's RAW in Bangladesh, RAW officers worked closely with Usmani to select and approve local cell commanders. Among them were Major Khalid Musharraf, Major Safiullah, and Abdul Qadir Siddiqui, later known as Tiger Siddiqui, who became the principal liaison between Mukti Bani commanders and Indian intelligence handlers. This mattered because once command, intelligence, and logistics flow through a foreign intelligence agency, an insurgent force ceases to be independent. It becomes a proxy. Oversight did not stop with intelligence agencies, though. Operational command came from the Indian Army's Eastern Command, under senior officers including Major General J.F.R. Jacob. Multiple sources describe Jacob's role in synchronizing Mukti Bani operations with Indian military planning, aligning sabotage, infiltration routes, and timing with India's strategic objectives in the East. To make this work, India built an infrastructure of war. 6 major training centers were established on Indian soil, each commanded by a serving Indian brigadier. Camps in West Bengal, Bihar, Tripura, Assam, and Meghalaya trained hundreds of fighters at the same time. According to multiple reports, roughly 500 fighters were trained per camp, with total numbers reaching around 100,000 across all centers. But beyond these primary facilities, more than 83 training camps, possibly as many as 150, operated along the Indian border, often just kilometers from East Pakistan. Training followed a standardized pipeline, documentation and vetting, followed by 3 weeks of intensive military instruction. Now, this wasn't spontaneous rebellion, it was industrial scale militarization. Between 600 and 800 Mukti Bani officers were trained at regular Indian Army institutions, including the Indian Military Academy at Dehradun. Every 6 weeks, approximately 2,000 fully trained guerrillas were inserted back into East Pakistan for operations. And here's the interesting part, they were also paid. Salaries flowed through Indian organized channels under Operation Jackpot. Commanding officers received 500 Indian rupees per month. Other officers, cadets, and ranks received scaled payments. Uniforms, kits, bedding, and supplies were also issued. Some fighters wore khaki, others were deliberately kept in civilian clothing for infiltration. According to the Daily Star, this payroll system mirrored regular military structures. Now here's the thing, a foreign paid, foreign trained, foreign equipped armed force operating inside another country has a name. It's called proxy force. On May 15, 1971, India formally escalated its covert campaign. The Indian Army's Eastern Command launched Operation Jackpot, designed to reorganize Mukti Bani units and cripple East Pakistan's infrastructure. India supplied Italian howitzers, Dakota DC-3 aircraft, Otter DHC-3 planes, and Alouette helicopters. Mukti Bani fighters alongside raw operatives and Indian Army regulars in civilian clothing crossed into East Pakistan through forward bases in Tripura and West Bengal. India trained more than 400 naval commandos and frogmen tasked with sinking vessels in Chittagong, Chandpur, and Narayanganj. One sector commander later admitted that fighters were embarrassed to identify as products of Indian training, so they adopted the name Bangladesh Liberation Force instead. Then came the admissions. On December 1, 1971, the Times of London reported that a major portion of the Mukti Bani consisted of Indian soldiers. 2 weeks later, former Indian Prime Minister Morarji Desai, in an interview published in the Washington Post, stated plainly that thousands and thousands of Indian regular soldiers disguised as Mukti Bani were dispatched to East Pakistan. 5,000 of them died. This wasn't Pakistani propaganda. It was an Indian head of government acknowledging covert troop deployment. Mukti Bani operations included systematic sabotage of bridges, railways, and power stations, as well as urban bombings in Dhaka and Chittagong. But violence didn't stop at infrastructure. According to multiple sources, including The Chronology for Biharis in Bangladesh, The Encyclopedia of Violence, Peace and Conflict, and Professor R.J. Rummel's Death by Government, between 100,000 and 150,000 Biharis were killed, up to 20% of the community. Afrasiab Mehdi Hashmi, a Pakistani diplomat and author, documents eyewitness accounts of public executions, mass reprisals, and civilians burned alive in detention facilities. Many of these killings occurred after December 16, 1971, when Pakistani forces had already surrendered and Mukti Bani units exercised de facto control on the ground. One case illustrates how closely Indian and Mukti Bani operations were intertwined. The statesman recounts the story of Captain Prashant Kumar Ghosh, codenamed Peter, an Indian paratrooper sent across the border in disguise. Disowned if captured, Ghosh coordinated sabotage with Mukti Bani commander Abdul Qadir Siddiqui. He ambushed convoys and relayed intelligence to India. His mission focused on securing the Pungli Bridge, preventing Pakistani forces from regrouping near Dhaka and enabling India's rapid advance. By December 1971, Pakistan had roughly 34,000 troops in East Pakistan. India had between 150,000 and 400,000 troops surrounding the region, supported by an additional 100,000 Indian-trained Mukti Bani fighters, along with air superiority. The war ended on December 16th. Bangladesh was born, but the human cost estimated between 300,000 and 3 million dead. Today, Pakistan is routinely blamed for introducing terrorism to South Asia. But the historical record shows something more complicated. In India, the War of 1971 is remembered not with hesitation, but with pride.
मैं आज भारतीय सेना के उन वीर जवानों को भी नमन करता हूं जो मुक्ति युद्धों में बांग्लादेश के भाई बहनों के साथ खड़े हुए।
It's taught and recalled as the nation's finest military victory, the moment India avenged the trauma of partition, erased the humiliation of the 1962 war with China, and finally proved itself as a regional power. Politicians and military leaders still invoke 1971 to project strength against Pakistan, and it's often used to mock or intimidate during moments of tension. One Indian journalist put it bluntly, 1971 has become part of day-to-day life in India. It's folklore. And folklore doesn't ask hard questions. In the Indian narrative, 1971 is a story of gallantry and humanitarian rescue, India as the savior of oppressed Bengalis. Missing from that story, though, is the uncomfortable reality that India trained, armed, paid, and directed a proxy force inside Pakistan, embedding soldiers in disguise and coordinating sabotage long before open war began. At the same time, the consequences of that war still haunt India. Nearly 10 million refugees crossed into Indian territory, creating tensions that never fully faded. In Assam, those tensions resurfaced decades later through the National Registrar of Citizens, which uses March 24, 1971 as a cutoff, leaving nearly 2 million people at risk of statelessness. So here's the thing. In 1971, India trained insurgents, paid them, armed them, embedded disguised soldiers, directed sabotage, and threatened to hand over captured Pakistani troops to irregular forces known for reprisals. By modern definitions, that was proxy terrorism, and it happens decades before the accusations Pakistan faces today.